Greetings. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Chris Worden, and this is AJW, the incomparable Andy Jones-Wilkins.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah, and we're going to take some time today to preview the big Halloween party in the desert, the Javelina Jundred. We've got 3 events coming up this weekend, the 100-mile, the 100K, and the Jackass Night Run 31K as well. I assume that most of our conversation is probably going to focus on the 100-mile, simply because it's a golden ticket race, but we might have some time to talk about some of the other developments. Obviously, with the 100K, we can get into that a little bit later,
yeah.
But I guess I wanted to start, AJW, by talking to you. You've been a part of Javelina 100 a lot longer than I have. My first exposure to the race was as a pacer in 2014. I ran the 100K in 2015, and I ran the 100-mile in 2016, but unfortunately didn't finish. Since then, I've worked as a volunteer, part of the live stream, and also dancing out in the middle of the course just simply to direct traffic. I love being a part of this race, and it is now something I look forward to every year. What is your experience with Javelina 100?
Well, I ran it once, and it was in 2007. It was 6.5 loops of the Pemberton Trail. The start finish, the headquarters at the time was right there at the Pemberton Trailhead. The aid station was under the Ramada. And it was actually the year before Jamil took the race over. Jimmy and Roger Rublik were the race directors then. They took it over a couple of years after Jerry Kilgariff and Linda Van Tilborg gave it up. And so it was in the early years, but I've been coming back from time to time over the years. And I would say of all the ultras that I've been to over a 15-year period, Javelina has grown and changed and evolved the most. It's not Wasatch, let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. And for some other races, which have always been, obviously you're associated with Western states very prominently, and, your history there is well documented. But Western states has always been a big deal, whereas Javelina kind of worked its way up into being a big deal, as you noted.
It's kind of cool, actually, because what started as a low-key bunch of relatively locals in the desert then became sort of ultra running's Burning Man, and now is ultra running's Burning Man combined with a highly competitive race. I think it's going to be the largest field for a 100-miler in the United States, and in my opinion, and I always have those, the second most competitive 100-miler in the country this year, and probably the second most competitive ultra in the country this year, but that could be debatable.
Yeah, it's going to be an insane field. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, we're going to go over some of the prominent names and some of our feelings about the field. I've got my picks. For those of you familiar with Run Free Trail, they give you the opportunity to do some fantasy booking, which is a lot of fun. And it creates some discussion. But the amazing thing about this year's field, talking about the 100-mile in specific, I believe, is the fact that when you look at this field, trying to pick, as far as a fantasy handicapping goes, I picked 5 men and 5 women, the same way everybody else does. And I looked at my sheet afterwards, and I was like, wow, I left this person. I left this person. I left these people off the list. And it's simply because the field is just so deep. It's so stacked.
It's incredibly stacked, but it's also a tricky time of year to handicap a race. I've got a list of 12 on each side, and you don't really know. It's late October. Some of these people might be running on fumes. Some of these folks are primed for this race. Some of these folks have plenty of experience in the hot and the dry. Others are coming from where maybe they've just gotten their first snowfall. So I think there's a dynamic in a big late October race that's different than, say, a June or July race. And in many ways, for those of you who've been around the sport long enough, I think Javelina is at the point right now where it's occupying the late season big time ultra in the United States that used to be occupied by the North Face 50 in San Francisco. And I think as that continues to evolve, I think we're going to see this field continue to strengthen. But this year is going to be a lot of fun. There's no doubt about it.
That makes sense because, of course, one of the key tenets of Javelina 100 is that it's a Western States qualifier. Obviously, it's a golden ticket race, and we'll talk about our picks for that coming up. However, the fact that it's a Western States qualifier can cause runners, and it's at the end of the season. Obviously, with another week or two left in the season, there aren't many more options. If runners like rank and file, middle of the pack runners want to jump into a Western States qualifier to get into that lottery the first weekend of December, this is the last chance for a lot of them.
Yeah. They basically got this race and then Rio del Lago in Northern California next weekend, and that's it.
Yeah.
So really, if they've waited this long, or they maybe had tried earlier at Black Canyon or Canyons and fell short, this is it.
Yeah.
Now, if they play their cards right, we're talking about mid-packers and take advantage of the cool night temperatures and just take it easy for those first 12 hours. It's probably in the bag, although you want to make sure you don't, you leave something in the tank so you're not out there until it starts getting hot again on Sunday morning. The Sunday morning heat, it could be the same exact temperature, but the Sunday morning heat just feels way worse.
It hits different, and that Arizona sun does hit differently for those that have not run out in it. And to that end, before we get into the field, I guess I wanted to discuss with you, I checked the most recent temperatures that I saw, the most recent forecasts, about a high of 81 and a low in the upper 50s. That's actually relatively cool for this race as far as a high temperature. However, the desert sun hits differently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know this from personal experience. I see, obviously, you just moved back to the valley after living in several other places, and, getting reaccustomed and reacquainted with that sun when it's 80, 90 degrees or higher is a process. And that's one of the reasons why I think when we go over our picks, a lot of my picks are leaning towards people who I know have that desert experience. Mm-hmm. Can you expand upon that, talking about your experience in the desert and in high temps, obviously whether it be here or at Western States or at other high temperature races?
Well, I also think, if you got, let's say, did you get your forecast temps from, say, Fountain Hills?
Yes.
Right. So if you could just go a few miles from Fountain Hills, but now you're out in this wide open desert.
True.
Where the surface, the ground is just baking all day. I mean, it may not be baking in 110 degrees like it is in July and August, but it's still baking. There's ambient temperature coming up from the ground. And likewise, as it cools down in the evening, it cools down much more precipitously. So it might be a delta of 85 to 55 in Fountain Hills. It might be 90, 92 to 48 in the desert. And the little microclimates going through the washes and things like that. You never know when a breeze is going to come up, or there's no breeze. Not to mention the fact that the only place you're going to get shade is when you get to the aid stations. Unless you crawl under a tree somewhere. So in terms of my experience in the desert, I love running in the desert. I've been a heat runner for a long time, Western States and other races. I think it takes a certain amount of patience to run in the desert. You need to pay attention to, most of all, your hydration. I mean, I've lived in humid places where you sweat like crazy. If you're coming from a humid place to here, you're going to be easily as hot, and you're not necessarily going to know it. So I think you've got to really be aware of how your body's reacting to the desert heat.
Yeah, I think that's important, and the heat sneaks up on you, but the cool does as well.
Oh, yeah.
Javelina Jundred, when you look at the course profile, is not what we would call a, quote, difficult race in terms of, tens of thousands of feet of climb. It's a pretty moderate hilly race, and there's a slight uphill towards Jackass Junction, the midway or the approximate midway point, and then it's a slight downhill coming back from Jackass Junction, but the race has a notoriously low finish rate when you think of its technicality or its difficulty. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the weather. And while the heat is something that we talk about as well, one thing I've learned over the years, speaking with runners that come here to visit, is that the cool hits differently too because it's so dry.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a conversation with a runner late last year at an event. I can't remember which one, but they had come here, I believe it was across the years, had come here from another place, and they were complaining about how cold it was. They couldn't believe how cold it got here. And I mentioned to them, it's 46 degrees. They were thinking that it was like 25 or 30 degrees, but when you've got that cold, dry air hitting you, it does hit differently. So 55 can cause some of these runners to potentially shut down physically and start shivering uncontrollably.
And it drops quickly.
Yes.
The temperature, so a unique challenge of a late October race is a long night, 12 plus hours of dark, right? and they could be going 12 hours in the nice warm sun. It could be still as warm as 70 at 5 p.m. and it might be in the 50s by 7 p.m. And you might leave headquarters feeling pretty good with just a tank top, and you could be getting out to Jackass Junction and start to be shivering. So runners need to think, especially when they're leaving for whatever ends up being their first night loop.
Yes.
You know, for some people, for the really fast folks, it might be their fifth loop is their first night loop. But for most people, their first night loop will be their third or their fourth. And some might even want some night gear when they leave for their second, just in case it gets dark around the backside. So I think that you want to be prepared for that. You also need to be prepared, if you haven't run the race before, for the mental challenge of looping.
Yes.
You know, let's not forget that. You're coming by your car and your crew every 20 or so miles, and it can be tempting to just be like, I'll call it a day at 100K.
There are some definitely unique challenges and conditions in this race. You know, the last time I attempted to run it, throwing on a headlamp at 2 p.m. seemed a little bit excessive, but I knew that by the time I came back around, it was going to be dark.
Yeah.
So that's the way it goes here. Do you want to just jump into prognosticating perhaps the women's 100-mile field?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, folks, the 100-mile field for Javelina 100 this year is absolutely stacked. One of the beautiful things about this race roster, as I was going through it myself, was the notion that there are 7 or 8 or even more runners that would not surprise me if they walked away with a golden ticket. And to my knowledge, I don't believe anybody in the race is actually qualified for Western States as of yet. I was going through and I didn't think that there was any top 10 finishers.
On the women's side?
Yeah.
That's correct.
That's pretty amazing to have this high caliber of a field with nobody qualified for Western States, which means in all likelihood, unless certain people have their plans otherwise, those tickets aren't going to pass down. You know, we'll talk about what's going to happen on the men's side where there is some potential for that. But on the women's side, I think that you might be forced to finish top 2 in order to have, you know, an entry to Western, which means there are going to be some extremely fast, extremely talented athletes on the outside looking in.
And from a strategic standpoint, I think you could almost count on seeing some risks. You know, you don't often think of a race with you know, a relatively mellow elevation profile out in the desert that has a real party atmosphere of people just throwing it out there and taking some risks. But I think they're going to have to, in much the same way athletes actually at Western States need to take risks to try and win. Or get a top 10 and be invited back next year. So I think we're going to see some fast times. We're probably going to see some pretty big blowups, which we're not here to predict blowups.
True.
But I mean, when you do look at the list on both the men's and women's side, you have experienced Javelina runners, then you have non-Javelina but experienced 100-mile runners, and then you have not done either.
Yes.
But have done some really fast, impressive stuff. So if you take those 3 buckets on both the men's and women's side, you know, we don't know where that's going to necessarily go. But you could also be that person who keeps your cards close to the vest, sticks to the back, waits till maybe loop 4 to make a move, and could reel in some of that early anxiety and angst around trying to get that ticket.
For sure. I guess the first place we should start, just to simplify things, because we've got plenty of people to talk about, would be to talk about the former champions that are currently in the field. And there are 3 of them representing 4 victories over the course of the Javelina 100 history. We have the most recent champion was Nicole Bitter in 2020. We have Casey Lichtig, who won in both 2019 and in 2014, and former course record holder Devin Yanko, who won in 2015. So we've got some extremely talented runners at the very top of the women's field. We've got 3 former champions, but we've also got other women who are, you know, high caliber, have finished in the top 3 here, also have some ridiculously fast 100-mile times. We've got Stephanie Flippen, who has broken 15 hours in the 100-mile twice in the last 2 years. We've got Brittany Peterson, who finished second here last year, but her golden ticket deferred down to Tessa Chesser. And of course, Brittany has had extreme success at Western States. We've got Annie Hughes, who I believe is, you know, somewhat of an unknown, you know, as far as what can she do on a flat fast 100, because what she's done to this point is basically throw down on some rugged, harder courses. So I guess
Yeah, I mean, what's she going to do after her 15-hour warm-up?
Right.
She'll be done.
Right. Yeah. So I guess.
Well, I mean, I think that list right there, that list right there, any of those women could win the race.
Agreed.
Could win the race. And we still have some other names on here. So going backwards, I'm really curious about Stephanie Flippin.
Yes.
With these fast, flat, she's almost coming here in the context that Arlen Glick came on the men's side last year, had these super fast, not so competitive hundreds in the Midwest and other places. She's sort of this year's Arlen Glick on the female side, although she has been out in the West, right, having run jackpot before, maybe twice. Yeah. So she's not completely unfamiliar with this environment like Arlen was last year.
True.
But if you take the 3 past champions plus Brittany with a second place and second and fourth at Western States, that's like your experienced group, right? And if I'm one of these, pushing the pace gals, let's say Manuela Sokol, Sokol, was an Olympic marathoner, and I think had an extremely good performance at Tarawera, if I'm not mistaken. Where she could dart off the front, and I don't know if I had the likes of Casey and Brittany and Devin, following on my heels, I'd be running scared, So I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic between the experienced and the newcomers.
Absolutely, and to just pile onto the list, there are several other names that when you look at this race roster, it's absolutely unbelievable. As we talked about, you mentioned Manuela Sokol. Talking about another unknown, and I want to kind of pause and give you a chance to explain this because I saw you mentioning on Twitter her name and pointing it out. Heather Jackson.
Heather Jackson is a fascinating story. I just learned about her on Twitter about a week and a half ago. She has not run an ultra. She has not run an ultra, but she's a multi-time Ironman, full distance Ironman champion.
Yes.
And is from Bend, Oregon, knows deserts, knows heat. And her name popped up on the entry list. And in ultra sign up, when you have no results, you're all the way down at the bottom. Yep. I mean, she's all the way down at the bottom. I'll be fascinated to see. I mean, I assume in triathlon, I mean, she's obviously run long distances in training and at least marathon distance and probably longer. But that will be, so though an Olympic marathoner and a world-class, triathlete. And not to mention some other former golden ticket winners, Michelle Magagna, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Anne-Marie Madden, Arden Young, Riley Brady, Vermont 100K finisher, a beast coaster. I mean, I think those 4, for example, will be happy to lay in wait and see if there's any carnage and see if those last 2 loops yield any women coming back to the field. So when have we last had, there's 12 we've just kind of gone through that are kind of in the mix. You're going to earn your golden ticket. And I say that in all sincerity. I mean, I like to track how the golden ticket winners ultimately do at Western States. Not surprisingly, typically golden ticket folks from canyons do better than Bandera, and typically golden ticket folks from both the desert races, Black Canyon and Javelina, do about the same. I'm guessing this year, and we don't know the full depth of the Black Canyon field right now, but I'm guessing, with the exception of the people who qualify at UTMB, the people who qualify with these golden tickets at Javelina will have earned it. And we can expect to see them near the front at Western States.
I think you're absolutely right. And, we've named off, several names as you did. And the fascinating thing about this field is that there are other, runners who in a normal other year, we would be putting them right at the top of the field. Mm-hmm. One name that we didn't even mention is a local runner on the Aravaipa Racing team, Brianna Grigsby.
Yeah.
Brianna's finished top 5 at this race before. Recently, I want to say it was 2021 or even 2020, but it was 2019 she finished 8th. And in the 100K last year, she finished 2nd. So, I mean, she's battle tested out here in the desert, and she's run against, the best. And nobody's talking about her necessarily as a front runner. I mean, is she a contender? Yeah, I think in a way, because nobody knows what's going to happen out there. Strange things can happen at 100 miles. It's like Jenga. Like the higher you build that tower, the longer you make that race, the more things can go wrong. Like I think it's far more easy to assume that the best is going to come forth in a shorter race at 100 miles.
And I think in contrast to past javelinas, where by 100K, you pretty much know there's sort of 5 people vying for the win. I think there's going to be deeper than that. I think you're going to need to look 10, 11, 12 deep. Who knows? It could even come down to a last loop showdown, where someone gets reeled in or someone waits and makes a move in the last loop. I think the tactics in this year's race will be different than we've seen in the past. And it'll be fun to watch for sure. And this women's field, it's diverse, right? Fast road runners. We talked about a triathlete. We talked about sort of technical, Brittany Peterson would be the first to say she much prefers the technical stuff, but she can transition to the smooth, flat stuff. Casey has a diesel engine, right? If Flippin's going to run a low 14, Casey's probably not going to win. Yep. But if it's going to be 15:05, Casey's going to be right there, right? So I think you've got runners that are going to know their limits, run within their expectations, take advantage of their strengths. Just the course, right? With the gradual uphill, the rollers in the middle, the sweet downhill. Don't forget the first loop that includes Escondido is the one sort of techie, annoying part of the whole day. That little extra loop. Fortunately, you only have to do that once. Yeah. But if runners get in a rhythm where they've got the downhill legs from Jackass back to the road crossing, they can really save energy on some of the ups and really make time. And someone like Devin, I remember she ended up dropping out last year, but she's 6 feet tall. Yeah. She makes a move on those downhills.
Yeah, so she moves really well.
She really does. Yeah.
And that downhill, as you mentioned, from basically shortly after leaving Jackass Junction down to the road crossing at Rattlesnake Branch is the fastest part of the course.
Oh yeah.
It's, for those who have not seen it before, it's flat. I mean, it's very non-technical. It's almost like what we would call canal running here, and slightly downhill the entire way. It's a lot of fun, and you move really quickly as you're heading down there.
And it's a nice enough downhill grade that gravity's taking you, but it's not steep where you have to put the brakes on or worry about your quads or anything like that. It's a sweet section of trail.
Absolutely. A couple of the names that we talked about, one that you have spoken to very recently and one that I've spoken to very recently, I want to and they're both contenders. They're both coming off of or dealing with certain ailments or physical injuries or recovery from. That would be Devin Yanko, who I saw at Hennepin 100, and Casey Lichtig, who you just recently interviewed on the Coop podcast. I guess based on what you've talked to with Casey, I kind of look at her and Devin both as, even though they're fully talented, fully experienced, as a little bit of a wild card in their own way, simply because we don't know where they're at and where they stand in terms of their recovery and coming back, in full to, what we know they can accomplish. Can you speak to what you...
I am very much, I'm glad to hear that you spoke to Devin. I've known Devin for, almost 20 years, and I know she's got some health issues,
yes.
and I know that you will have an opportunity to speak to those, because I love Devin and she's been around a long time. With respect to Casey's, when it comes to Western States, Casey's like the kind of person that, how if a car falls on someone and you have superhuman strength and the person could lift up the car? Casey is like that for Western States. Like something happens to her when you just mention that race, when you and frankly, she fully intends, if she doesn't get the golden ticket at Javelina, to sign up for Bandera and then to sign up for Black Canyon but she wants it here, and it's a 100-miler. It's probably her best chance. In terms of her health, she'd be the first to admit she's her own worst enemy. She had a serious hamstring injury that she ran through until she could no longer run through it. It was practically severed when she did a high mountain race in Colorado. Had to get surgery, major surgery, no weight bearing for 12 weeks. I mean, serious recovery. She was able to start slow walking, in March, barely made it to the Western States starting line, did it sub 24 hours, but obviously wasn't fast enough to get the ticket. Since then, she's feeling great. And she's had a couple of times where she's overdone it, where she's just pushed a little. The most recently that she mentioned on a podcast, because Casey, as anybody who knows Casey, is one of the nicest people in ultra running. She was scheduled to pace a friend at a road marathon. And the friend had a certain pace goal in mind. I forget what it was, but it was pretty fast, like 3:10 or something. Yeah. And so she ran with him. And it was a little too fast for her hamstring in that moment. And it got a little angry with her for a couple of weeks. She'll be ready. She'll be ready to race. And you know, if she's in the hunt, if she's within an hour at 100K, I'd be worried about her.
Makes sense. Yeah. Well, and you know, to speak to, as I mentioned, I ran into Devin at Hennepin 100 earlier this month, and she was my pick to win that race, potentially outright. I mean, obviously at her best, she ran Umstead in, you know, under 14:30 earlier this year. So any questions about whether or not she's still got the speed, you know, from when she set the Javelina course record back in 2015, she still got it.
Yeah.
You know, even though she's now a master's class runner.
Which, by the way, her longevity is some of the most impressive in the sport. I
mean,
you know, she's gone through 3 incarnations of Anton Krupicka, and she's still doing it. So,
all right, for those of you that had the Krupicka reference, you know, you can check that one off the bingo card. But with Devin, you know, I don't think it's breaking any news. She on her social media has talked about how she has had some health issues of late with lupus, and how she's learning how to adjust and to deal with that. The amazing thing is that even with that, she still, when she had to withdraw from Hennepin, she had still run like sub 6:30 for the first 50 miles.
Really?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like Devin is as much a favorite as anybody, assuming her health holds up through this race. I don't know where she's at. I haven't talked to her. I emailed her there back and forth a little bit, trying to get her to come to some of our local events. We'll talk about those. But I think that, you know, all things being equal, everybody in the field being where it seems like they are, you know, health-wise, I think that she's actually a genuine threat for the top too.
And she's got will. I mean, she's had some DNFs, but she's also had some will. If you recall that the Western States that was featured in the Billy Yang movie Life in a Day, I mean, she was ready to drop out at last chance, mile 43. She sat there for half an hour with ice over her head. I mean, in tears, and she bounced back and got 3rd place. Yeah. So she is a bounce backer. She's willing to suffer. And she's got will, and I suspect she's going to confront this disease as she's confronted everything in her ultra career, which is like stare it right in the eye and stare it down. So I'm looking forward just to seeing her and catching up with her, and it's just great that she's coming back.
For sure. Nicole Bitter, 2020 winner. It almost feels like she's kind of like, you know, not in the background, but not being talked about as much as a contender, simply because of other names that are, you know, seemingly more dynamic in this moment.
And I'm not sure she's raced that much this year, which, related to what I was saying, a late season race, she could be just primed for this. And, and she knows the desert, she knows the dry, she knows what she's in for. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Nicole in the mix after 100K also.
Absolutely. Great results at Western States and Javelina 100 in the past. So it wouldn't shock me at all, like you were saying. And circling back around to one of our other big time contenders, Annie Hughes, what does she do on a course like this?
You know, first of all, it's incredible that she runs like a wise mid 40-year-old, and I think she's 24.
Yeah.
Right. So aside from the fact that she races a lot, which is like a 24-year-old, her style of racing is of a mature runner who's maybe been smacked around, but she's never been smacked around.
No.
Right. So I don't know, you know, knowing, you know, her success at these big long things like Cocodona, big high mountain races, just recently at Run Rabbit Run, she seems to recover like that. I don't know. I would call her a wild card because of that. Not because I don't think she has the talent, but, you know, I think frankly, a good, and this isn't the scope of this conversation, but a good result for Annie puts her in the mix for Ultra Runner of the Year. women's ultra. I mean, we know Courtney just won a big race over in Europe. So, but Annie busts one out, and she got second last year. Annie busts one out here. I think she could have a legitimate argument for it, and it shows what I love to see in ultra runners, like when Tim Tollefson came here, is I love to see their versatility.
Yes.
I love to see a mountain goat come and do something on a flat and fast desert course like this. And Annie has a chance to prove that.
For sure. And that's what Courtney did, herself. I mean, whether it be winning Hard Rock, UTMB, or Desert Solstice. I mean, she's done it all.
Absolutely. She's done that.
That's what we're
Annie
trying to find out.
has a chance of being in that same conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what we're going to find out this weekend as to whether Annie Hughes can adapt to those more rolling, faster courses, because I mean, she has taken and butchered some course records. She butchered the course record at Coldwater Rumble. She butchered the course record at Cocodona, albeit under different circumstances, but she also still won that race by several hours.
Yeah.
And she also butchered the course record at Run Rabbit Run too. So at least as far as the hares go.
Yeah.
But I mean, so like there's, kind of a question as to what she can do. And, speaking of another runner who is moving into something new, I think we would be remiss if we didn't spend some time talking about Manuela Sokol. And I'll be honest, I know next to nothing about her other than what I could find on Wikipedia and on, various international running websites. I know that she is a Belgian Olympian in the marathon from 2016, ran like a 2:37, which puts her in like Camille range in terms of her marathon. Mm-hmm. But I know that she had an excellent result at Tarawera back in, 2019? Yeah, that's my notes say. Yep.
Was it in the
2020?
Was it in the 100K?
It was in the 100K. She ran a 9:39.49.
I mean, yeah. So huge wild card. And we know that the world of ultras is littered with fast marathoners off on the side of the trail, never even able to finish 100. But we also know that in the case of fast road marathoners, the 230 to 235 to 240 is kind of a sweet spot where they know how to pace, they know how to run really fast, but they also can pull back. What I wonder about, because even that Tarawera time is fast, can she keep the reins in for the first 100K, especially if some of these folks take risks like we're thinking they might, take Heather Jackson perhaps.
Yes.
And if that happens and Manuela gets sucked into that, I'm liking the chances of the Caseys and the Brittnys and the Nicoles and the other former winner, the Devons. I'm liking their chances more if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, when it came to my picks, it was more of an issue of those who have experience in this race and in these conditions. And that's what drove a lot of what I was thinking. I did have a little bit of an adventure as, a couple of my picks, but other than the runners that we've talked about specifically, is there anybody that we maybe haven't touched upon in the women's field that deserves a mention as somebody who could sneak up? I mean, I've got a list of 20 deep, but a lot of that is based on, ultra sign up, and I don't have a lot of familiarity with people beyond who we've mentioned.
I'm not sure I could come up with anybody either, although I want to circle one more time back to Stephanie Flippin.
Yes.
Along the same lines as Manuela. I mean, Stephanie has 100-mile experience, but, low 14s, right? Low 14s, I think at Jackpot and at Tunnel Hill. This is a little bit more hilly than that, but that translates to 14:30. I mean, it's not far from Camille's time last year.
Yeah.
And I mean, and if she comes out here and busts out a 14:30, I don't know who's going to catch her.
Yeah.
The question is, will she come out here and bust out a 14:30? So, like, in terms of straight up 100-mile foot speed, you would think, well, we've got to look at her. But there's so many variables other than 100-mile foot speed, especially, I mean, a lot of the races that she's had these incredible times haven't been all that competitive, right? She's been competing with the men. So I'm intrigued by her as well as the rest of this field to see where it's going to go. So let's go with our picks. Who do you have for your go 5 up to 1, and then I'll give you mine.
My 5 up to 1 here, I've actually got them in front of me. Number 5, I've got Casey.
Okay.
Number 4, Brittany Peterson. Number 3, Annie Hughes. And my top 2, getting the golden ticket in second place, Stephanie Flippin. And number 1, Devin Yanko.
You have Devin winning.
I saw her, and despite the fact that she had some issues at Hennepin, she just seemed like she was in such good spirits, and I think that bodes well for her. She seems to be in the right mindset with what she's dealing with, and as long as her body is able to, hold together, I think that we could see her, run that sub 14:30.
Mm-hmm. All right, mine's a little. I put Nicole fifth.
Mm-hmm.
I think the desert. I think the experience. I have Casey fourth. I have Annie third. I have Brittany coming in second again, and I have Flippin going off the front and staying off the front.
That makes sense. I mean,
I don't want to put pressure on her, but I think if she can run under 14:30, she's got it.
So we each left off a former champion. Doesn't it tell you how amazing that field is? And that's not like something to apologize or like I feel apologetic about because, it's not an indictment of, in your case, Davin, or in my case, Nicole, that we don't think that they're amazing. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Right. It's just that this race is so hard to handicap, and it's really just, honestly, it's rolling a die to see who has the best day versus who might have something go sideways for them.
Exactly. So that's interesting. We had a couple crossovers, and we each left out a past champion.
Yeah, and that's probably
I hope I don't see them at the happy hour. I just said how much I love Devin.
No. I mean, and they're all great people. All of my experiences with everybody that we've talked about has been fantastic.
Yes.
Do you think we're going to pivot to the men in a second? Do you think that the course record's in danger? 14:03.
Yes.
You do.
Wait, 13:03.
For the
women.
Yeah,
no,
14:03.
No,
I don't think so either.
No. I'm sorry. I thought we were jumping.
Okay.
I think winning. I think it could be under 14:30, but I don't think 14:03.
Yeah, I mean, I was out there last year in seeing Camille in person. Oh my goodness, she was on another level last year.
Someone, especially Flippin could be close.
Sure,
but I'm not. I don't think 14:03.
Yeah, I mean 14:03
I think
is
the course record safe.
Yeah. So we'll pivot to the men here. And of course, I guess the first place we should start is, again, with the former champions. And we've got 4, titles accounted for over the course of 2 men. Obviously, Pat Regan won in 2017, 18, and 19. And Arlen Glick won last year. Pat Regan has the course record at 13:01:14, which he ran in 2017. And his times since then haven't been a slouch either. 13:11, 13:42. I mean, leading off with those two, is pretty amazing anyways. But as it's been documented, a couple things about those two. Number one, Pat Regan has made it abundantly clear he doesn't really have any interest in the golden ticket. Now, it's still only Wednesday, and who knows? But
sandbagger.
But you never know. You never know. Like,
I can't wait to see Pat tonight. And get him in the corner.
And we'll be seeing Pat at our group run, so we're excited about that. But and Arlen is already qualified, so like those two, we'll circle around to them when we're talking about our picks in general. But obviously, we're going to talk about the golden ticket. So I think that our discussion probably needs to start at the next set of contenders. And there are some fantastic runners in this field. Nick Curry. Obviously, local, part of the, history of Aravaipa Running, and has been on a tear for the last 18 months, setting the U.S. record for most miles in 24 hours with a staggering 173 miles. Then Mark Hammond. Mark Hammond is in this field, and Mark Hammond is kind of being overlooked by a lot of people despite having a 12,3,500 mile in the last 2 years. I mean, those two, you've got Matt Daniels, who is, had an amazing Western States performance. What was that, 2019?
2019.
Yeah.
Yep.
You've got Dakota Jones, who is, I guess, the male equivalent of what Annie Hughes is doing, in my opinion, where Dakota is stepping onto a flatter, faster course, because we're used to seeing Dakota, mixing it up at Hard Rock and, in Idaho and in races like those. Whereas, like, this is not that. And, who's to say he can't come out here and throw down, but like, Hammond, Curry, Matt Daniels, Jacob Puzzi last year, finished 6th with a 15:35. We've got, a list of guys on the men's side and almost the male equivalent of Manuela Sokol in Patrick Gomez, who is a fast marathoner.
And then you've got a former golden ticket guy in Jonathan Ray.
Yeah.
Right? And knows the desert. And then a local guy that Sarah highlighted for us, Graham Shalvoy. Shalvoy.
Yeah, on the Aravaipa
I mean,
racing
maybe
team.
not in for the win, but certainly could be a force in the dynamic of the race.
Yeah, Graham, I believe that this is his first 100-mile attempt.
Nice.
So it'll be kind of curious again to see how he does. But Graham has experience, in these hills. Like he has run, plenty of times in the desert as a member of the Aravaipa racing team.
Right. So I'm gonna jump in if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna Hammond to me is the male Casey. He knows the Western States magic. I think he wants to be back. I think he's ready to bust one out, and he knows his best chance of a golden ticket is in a 100-miler, not in a 100K.
Absolutely.
Right? And so he is a disciplined runner. He's a smart runner. He's going to stay on top of his nutrition. He's going to do everything right. Someone's going to have to beat him versus him beating himself. Dakota has, he's barely 30 years old. He's been in the sport like 13 years, which is incredible.
Yes.
Has never run Western States, but we do think of him a lot at Hard Rock, but he had 2 really fast Lake Sonomas back in the Lake Sonoma days, which is Lake Sonoma's more rolling than Javelina, but it's a lot of smooth, buttery single track, and Dakota can throw down at a fast 50. This is a fast 100. What I'm worried about with Dakota is he'll just kind of get sick of running because there's just so much running. But I could see both Hammond and Dakota as like these not so old but kind of grizzled vets kind of being in the mix. And then Daniels there was another, Daniels and Nick.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's take those separate. Daniels, I know, has battled almost a year and a half worth of up and down injury, life circumstances, job changes, and so forth. And he's one of the guys I think benefits from the late October time frame that other people might be coming in a little bit on fumes. He's coming in fresh.
Yeah.
And I'd be worried about a fresh Matt Daniels, right? And I think I know I talked about Devin and being tall. Matt's a big, tall boy, and he can hammer that downhill section. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some splits from Jackass Junction to the road crossing that are insanely fast from him. And Nick, what can you say? Metronome Nick, right? I mean, I think he will go under 14 this year. I mean, will he go in the low 13s? I don't know, but he had an incredible 75K metronomic in that training race that was
549.
549 for 75K and negative split it. He's made that into an art form. He's when you're in the room with Nick Curry, pardon his apologies to his brother Jamil, you're the second smartest person in the room. I mean, he's a smart guy when it comes to life. He's a smart guy when it comes to running. And the engineer's mind is at work. So that's a dynamic group of 6 right there. And then whatever happens with Reagan and Glick, they're going to be pushing it.
Yeah.
And whether they care, I mean, Glick doesn't need a golden ticket, and Patrick is quote unquote claiming he doesn't want one, but they wouldn't mind seeing a 12 on that clock when they get to the finish line, especially if the temperatures hold and it doesn't get up into the 90s. I also think, similar to the way I was talking about Annie for Ultra Runner of the Year, runners these days pay attention to that. Runners pay attention to an Ultra Runner of the Year votes help with sponsorship. They help with future opportunities. And I think Arlen is probably wants one more notch in that belt for Ultra Runner of the Year consideration. I haven't talked to him about it, but I'd be interested. And this is a race you can definitely do that at. So it's going to be fun and it's going to be dynamic. And in this race, contrast to the women, I think the course record could go down.
I agree with you there. I would actually say it's even money for this course record to go down. But, we've just scratched the surface in terms of the men's field. There are several other runners with respectable times. We didn't really, go too deeply into, Jonathan Ray and Patrick Gomez. One of the names that I had been kind of looking at outside of the box was Cody Logan. Now,
tell me about Cody. I know nothing about him.
I know very little about Cody,
good.
But Ultra Sign Up is your friend. And what I saw with Cody is that he won the Coldwater Rumble last year with one of the faster times in history. It was like 17:38. And I think that's like the fourth or fastest time in course history, which is fairly impressive. Coldwater is much less runnable than Javelina, and it also is, gets, as cold as the desert gets out here. But what really kind of caught my eye was his performance at the 2021 Ray Miller. And he won that with the fourth fastest time in course history, which puts him in
That's impressive because there have been some studs run that race.
Yeah. And my thought process behind putting him in my top 5 was the idea that if you're winning the Ray Miller, then you've got a heck of a career ahead of you, or a heck of a stretch ahead of you. I mean, Dylan Bowman has won it. Hal Kerner's won it. I mean, we've seen, some really heavy hitters come into that race. Jorge Pacheco, who
old nemesis of mine.
For those of you not familiar, Jorge took a win at Javelina Jundred away from Andy back in 2007.
Yes, I have the honor of having my name underneath Jorge in 5 different 100-mile results.
Wow.
Yes.
So he kind of
second to Jorge 5 times, never beat him.
That is wild.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of names that
have done well at Ray Miller.
At Ray Miller. So if you're winning in Malibu, you are likely. And Cody's only 28. That's another thing. So like his career is potentially just beginning.
Yeah.
I believe that his PR for the 100-miler is, it's impressive by, normal human standards, 17:37 at Rio del Lago back in 2019. But that was a couple years ago, and obviously he's made strides since then.
Is he an Arizona guy?
No, he's a California guy.
Okay,
so.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about Ray Miller, too, is it does have some steep ups and downs as it's leaving the beach and coming back, it's a lot of rolling, buttery stuff like we have here. So I think it plays well. Success at Ray Miller does play well here. So he's one to watch.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Didn't make my list, I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, again, there's so many names that we can look at. I mean, we didn't even talk about some of the other names, like Jeremy Pope, who ran a 14:27 at Canal Corridor last year. Bob Hearn, I know that Bob Hearn isn't seen as a contender in this kind of thing, but he ran sub 15 last year. Jordan Camastro ran, ran a 15:15 at Jackpot 2 years ago. I mean, these are runners who are not getting any love for the golden ticket conversation.
You mentioned Jacob Puzzi also, who was in, I think, 6th or 5th here last year and has really good foot speed, and I think has probably picked and chosen his races. He's probably not on the front of everybody's mind very much, but if you're under raced coming into this, anything can happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's just such a great field here, and I guess in the interest of I guess putting it out there for ourselves, what do you got in your top 5?
Give my top 5? Okay, I'll go from 5 to 1. I'm thinking that Matt Daniels, as much as I just extolled him, I think he's going to probably be 5th. I'm going to have Dakota 4th. And Metronome Nick is going to be 3rd. And Arlen and the Georgia Peach are going to battle it out, and I think Reagan's going to win. So I got Reagan, Arlen, what did I say? Reagan, Arlen, Nick, Dakota, Matt.
Okay, so our top 3 are almost the same. Number 5, I'm calling my shot by saying Cody Logan.
You are?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I put it. It's out there on social media, so it's got to be, I can't delete it. Number 4, I've got Mark Hammond. I saw him at Solstice when he ran that 12:35, and it was just so impressive. Does that translate here? Maybe, but he's had Western States success.
Oh, yeah.
So,
no surface is going to bug him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's why I put him at 4th. 3rd, I've got Nick. Now,
so we both have Nick 3rd.
Let's be honest.
Missing the ticket by 1 spot.
No.
Oh, actually,
getting the ticket.
Yes. So you have Arlen and Georgia Peach.
Yeah. So
okay.
So I've got
Pat, even if Pat changes his mind and takes a ticket.
Yeah.
Nick's going.
Yeah. So Pat, I've got at 2 and Arlen at 1. But I'll be honest, I would not be surprised 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1.
Any
3,
of
1,
those
2.
three.
And
interesting that we have the same podium.
I think that
just a little flipping.
That's the one consistent thing I've seen about a lot of the people online in other preview shows, other posts, is that I think that there's a consensus that there are 3 runners at the top, and there might be a the slightest of separation between them and the rest of the field.
Yeah.
And it's not because they don't think Dakota's not talented or Mark's not talented or, Daniel's not talented. It's just that, like, it's just different with what we've seen from, Pat here and what we've seen from Arlen and Nick over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, Arlen and Nick have just been on another level. I mean,
And in contrast to the women's side, we, out of all those three, we haven't seen any blow-ups.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so at least so far, I don't want to jinx it, but they seem to be somewhat bomb-proof for blow-ups.
Well, and that's the thing is that, also that top three is pretty well bomb-proof. Like, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to assume that they know what they're doing out there. I mean, Nick has a second place finish here from 2020, but he's also been running this course for his entire career.
Yeah.
Pat's won it 3 times, so he obviously knows what's going on. And Arlen has shown that, I mean, even at Jackpot, I didn't know this. It was funny because I pointed it out to somebody, but Arlen was running like kind of favoring one side, and it came out later. I heard on a podcast that Arlen had mentioned that he was kind of working through some discomfort at Jackpot. And when I mentioned it to somebody, like, no, he always runs like that. But no, apparently, he was struggling a little bit as he ran to a 13:27 mile. Like, those three are just on a different level.
So let me offer up a side bet for you, since we both have Nick third. What place will he be in at 100K?
Oh, like 10th or 11th.
I bet he's not even in the top 10, maybe 10.
Yeah.
But I bet you a lot of these guys are ahead of him after 3 loops.
I guarantee
it.
I mean, having seen Pat's performances out, he's going to come out leading.
Yeah.
And he's going to lead or
and
stay at the
Arlen
lead.
won't let him he'll keep him on a rubber band, I think. He won't let him get too far.
Yeah. But Nick, I mean, Nick does what he wants to do.
Oh, yeah.
And that is run his race, and he's going to negative split it, and he's going to pass you. Like, even though, you might have beaten him by an hour to the 100K mark, he is going to stay steady or actually, get faster as the race goes on, which is amazing.
So maybe if it's boring that we have the same top 3, I think what we're seeing in positions 4 through probably 8 is a lot of interesting stories.
Absolutely.
A lot of interesting stories with people coming back from time away, like Mark and Dakota, or Matt Daniels after having a great Western States 3 years ago, wanting to go back. I mean, I think the stories that are going to come out of this year's Javelina are going to be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kind of stepping away from the elites, there are a couple of interesting stories that I don't know if you're familiar with, but this being the 20th year of Javelina Jundred, it's kind of looked at as a homecoming in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
One of our special guests out there is going to be Jerry Kay, the founder of Javelina Jundred. And I think that it's really cool that she's going to be out there. And we've got several runners that are out there for their 10th, 11th, 12th, 15th buckle. Susan Donnelly, the all-time leader in Javelina Jundred finishes, is going to be going for number 15, and Susan doesn't DNF. Like, she just doesn't. I mean, her over 100 milers, there are several people that fit that description. Like, of the 22 people in history who have done 100 milers, 4 or 5 of them are in this field. It's pretty amazing that, this race and its history, talking about other people. Fred Roberts is going for his 12th buckle. Karen Bonet is going, I believe, for her 12th as well. David Bliss and James Ehas are each going for their 10th.
That's awesome.
Like, I know that, you haven't been here in a little while, but what do you think brings people back every year?
Well, you mentioned Jerry Kay, and I think we probably have a lot of people tuning into this broadcast who don't know like the whole story of Jerry Kay. But Jerry Kilgariff, long before Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, for ultras, there was the Ultra List. It's a listserv, and with the possible exception of Gary Cantrell, Laz, the most active participant on the Ultra List back in the late 90s and early 00s was Jerry Kilgariff. And she was not subtle. I mean, if she was posting the stuff that she posted on the Ultra List on Twitter, she'd probably get she'd get banned. But she was awesome. And she decided to pull off this Javelina Jundred race. She did it for a few years. She also did Zane Grey for a long number of years. She loved the sport because of the community for all the right reasons. And the fact that she's coming back for year number 20 is really, really awesome.
It's special.
And it is special. And I think it does some events try to be more than they are. I'm not going to name any names, but whether it's through sponsorship or attracting elite fields, or Javelina, even this year with this competitive field, has never tried to be more than it actually is. A late October Halloween party in the desert where people run for a long time and wear costumes. That started with Jerry. And then Roger and Jimmy took it over, and Jamil took the race over when he was 24 and pretty much didn't know what he was doing. But look what he's done, right? Yeah. But he's stayed true, and that's why they return. That's why you've got 10 and 15-year returners. Not just, some would say, oh, well, it's because of the party. No, it's a homecoming. And let's face it, in this day and age of like races that are impossible to get into, you can still get into you got to sign up early.
Yes.
But there's also a wait list, and there's seems to always be some movement on the wait list because people's plans change and so forth. So I think they come back for those reasons. You can get in, you want to be there, you reconnect with people. The aid, I know that there's been some change of the leadership in some of the aid stations, but those aid station volunteers they're the best.
Yes.
And the aid stations are the best.
Yes.
And the fact the other reason to come back is you can come with your friends. They can set up and crew you. They get a whole day and night hanging out in the desert and talking to people and getting caught up like it's homecoming in college.
It is a communal feeling when you're out there. I mean, it basically becomes a city unto itself. I mean, and like all of the tents, the crew tents lining the entryway into the start finish line. It's really I've never been to races in Europe or anything like that, but I mean it's probably the closest thing we have to something like that here in the U.S. I mean, I've been out to Hard Rock and seen how magical that is, despite the small field and how much people get into it. I think it's kind of the same way at Javelina. Like it's become this. And part of the magic of Javelina is that you can only access the runners at one point. You can't go out to Jackass Junction. You can't go out to Rattlesnake Ranch. You have to do it at headquarters. So everybody just gathers there, and it becomes such a commune. People were talking about needing to get a crew set up tent space for their runner and stuff like that. And one of the things that I mentioned to people is you don't necessarily need a spot for yourself because there's only like 175 spots, but like 1,200 runners. Make friends. You can share one of those tents 4, 5, 6 ways. I've done it, and you make new friends and you see people you haven't seen. I can't wait to go to the expo to see all of the people I have not seen in years.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that. I guess quickly dabbling into the 100K. Have you taken a look at that field very much? I've kind of peeked a little bit.
I have not really, although I did see 2 big names pop up on the entry list recently.
Yeah.
Former 100-mile women's winner and course record holder Camille Herron on the women's side. And on the men's side?
Scott Traer.
Scott Traer.
Yeah.
Local boy.
Yeah. Scott Traer, who obviously...
Top 10 at Western States.
And won the golden ticket here for Black Canyon back in February. Now, with Camille, we need to qualify this because I spoke with, texted with Connor this morning, Connor Holt, her husband and coach, and they're going to make a decision, as the race approaches. They're not quite sure, whether or not she's going to run, but I think that speaks to how much fun it is out here because they're coming out to hang out with, even if they don't run.
Right.
They're going to be out there cheering on runners and tailgating. And I think for Camille, it'll be a cool experience. Like she ran the race in 2020 and had to drop out at the 100K mark despite being in the lead. She just was not doing great, but she still hung out at headquarters and was cheering on runners and having a beverage or two. And that's what this race is all about. So I'm really excited about that. So I guess we didn't, I don't know too many. I mean, I know that Lottie Brinks is running in the 100K. And before I found out the news this week, I would have made her the prohibitive favorite on the women's side. The men's side, I wasn't familiar with too many of the names. But frankly, if they're both racing, I think that Scott and Camille would be the favorite, odds-on favorites.
In terms of ultra running personalities, I think I saw Billy Yang's name on the 100K list.
Billy Yang is in the 100K. And speaking of people who have been around forever, are you familiar with John Vanderpot?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Is he on the 100K list?
Coming back for his
All
11th.
right. That's fantastic.
So, people keep coming back. For those of you that are not familiar, John Vanderpot is a runner from California, and he will be here for his 11th and always has bib number 420. I don't know what that means. But,
he is also consistently one of the most thoughtful commenters on I Run Far on my Friday AJW's Taproom column. He reads it every Friday, usually puts in a thoughtful comment that gets conversation going. Really thoughtful, reflective guy. I'm psyched he's coming back 11 times.
Yeah, another regular to the scene is Katra. Katra's going to be running the 100K
Will
this year.
anybody have a better costume?
It's really hard to say because, frankly, last year, for those of you who didn't see Katra's costume, it was terrifying. Like, she was dressed up as somebody from The Purge, and it was intense. But, I mean, you never know. She might be showing up with something, dark and intense or something bright and, and cheerful. But she's always a contender for the costume contest.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and that's part of the magic. I've seen some great costumes out here. I know that a few years ago, Pete Mortimer dressed as and shaved his facial hair to look like Freddie Mercury. And he was a dead ringer.
Did it work? Yeah.
Oh, it was fantastic. That's a great one. He's also done Borat out here. But yeah, that's part of the fun is that, people come out here in costume. Usually you're not seeing it from the very top of the field, but, we get it. I mean,
from a costume standpoint, what's the over under on Jubilee's costume changes?
I knew this. I believe that it was I think it's somewhere in the mid-20s typically.
Really?
There's Katra's costume.
There's Katra's costume.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, Jubilee, at least 24.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean,
that's
it's
incredible.
And that's over the course of the entirety. I mean, and she's constantly moving and going, and and that's one of the
little buzzer goes off in her watch. Oop, got to change.
Well, her energy is amazing because I mean, she's got to be up early to start the races, and then she's got to maintain, and then of course, just as runners are, getting ready to, or the 100-miler or 100K top runners have already come in. Then Jackass Night Run starts, shortly after sundown, and then she sends them out, and then all of a sudden the 100-miler winners start coming in, and that's when we'll be, on the air during the live stream, and and meanwhile we're probably getting a chance to take a break here and there. She's got to keep going, and all the way till I believe she might be able to steal a cat nap or two, but at the same time, until the very end, when she's seeing those last runners come in, she's out there.
Yeah, it's a tough RD gig here at Javelina, no doubt.
Yeah. So hats up for those of you who aren't familiar with Jubilee. If you're coming out here, just do what I do every year. Thank her for being the driving force she is behind Javelina 100 at this point. Hey Bryce, are we doing well enough time that we can take a question or two, or from the chat if we've got any?
Yeah, let's see. Wasn't too many questions coming in. There was some back and forth with Brett Horning, who I believe is actually on the entrance list.
Yeah, Brett. I believe Brett was a guest on the Single Track podcast this week and did a great job. They had a great discussion about Javelina 100 as a preview. I invite people to check that one out.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Brett as a runner, but I did like his podcast. I apologize, Brett, for not knowing more. There were a lot of names to go through this week, and one of the things that I had a lot of fun with as we got ready was I parsed through the data for every finisher in Javelina 100 history, and there's, I believe, 3,604 unique finishes for the race,
I'll tell you the highlight of that geeking out was 49 states are represented, and this year there's a starter from Rhode Island, the one state that is yet to have a finisher. So let's cheer for that Rhode Island dude.
I can't remember what his name is, but there was of all throughout the 20 years of Javelina 100, one state doesn't have a finisher, at least according to Ultra Sign Up. I mean, maybe some people didn't put their names in or their states in, but yeah, this could be the first time we have a finisher from Rhode Island, which would be a hoot.
That'd be a hoot, yeah.
Do we have any other?
No questions in the chat at the moment. A little back and forth on shoe strategy.
Shoe strategy. Well, Okay, so this is something I noticed. For those of you who haven't watched the Chasing Gold series hosted by our very own Scott Traer, he's been interviewing some of the golden ticket contenders over the course of the week, and been some great interviews. Nice bite-sized pieces, 15, 20-minute conversations. One of the things I noticed is that the people he talked to are very close to the vest about their shoe gear. Like some of the people are like, kind of keeping things in the down low, and a lot of the runners in general. So I've been following and a part of the sport since 2014, 2015. Is that something that's always been a big deal, like keeping your foot gear?
No.
I would think that it'd be more advantageous to like hype it.
Sure. When I think back to, say, the Scott Jurek years, I mean, he would always know what he was using for which Brooks model he was using at Western States, and Rob Craw, whatever North Face model he was using. Hal Kerner you would always know what his Adidas was, even all the way back to Ann Trace and Nike. It was pretty clear. So I think that's relatively new, that kind of close to the vest. And I don't know if everybody is close to the vest. I mean, I think I heard Brittany Peterson on the Single Track podcast, and she was pretty open with the Nike. I think she's going to use the Zagama, which is a relatively new shoe from Nike. I think that Casey will be pretty open with whatever Hoka she's going to wear.
That makes sense.
But I mean, it might be something too that maybe the sponsors are asking them to be a little bit more chill about it, or they have some sort of prototype that they want to unveil in a little bit more of a kind of cool way than just I'm running in this prototype.
I think I heard on the Run Single Track podcast, Arlen Glick is running in Kraft.
Is he?
That's I think that's a big get for both sides.
Yeah,
Frankly, I think it's great to see Arlen with a shoe, and then also a company like Kraft being able to, I'm not saying that they're sponsoring him. Don't put that on me. But like the fact that he is, wearing their shoe in a high profile race like this, it's kind of a big deal.
You don't need a ton of shoe here.
No.
You can, in the old days we would run it in road shoes, but you could run it in some pretty minimal shoes, some pretty, you need some tread, but you don't have to go crazy with shoe choice here. I mean, you might want to think about, getting all the grit and stuff in there. You want to have a change of socks possibly if things act up down there. But
well, I know Nick will be running in road shoes. Nick Curry will be running in road shoes. I know that Camille ran in the ran in road shoe last year as well when she won. So
and Tim Tollefson ran in regular old Hoka Cliftons.
Yeah. So I mean, you've got those options. I guess to close things out here. Oh, sorry.
We did have a little influx of questions here. If you guys want to do a
we'll
rapid
take some
fire session.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Do we know the fastest anyone has run this race in a costume?
Do we know?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Don't have. If I had to venture a guess, it would probably, I have a guess on who it would be. I don't know like what his fastest time is here though, but Jordan Camastro always wears a costume at this race.
Does he?
And Jordan's PR for the 100-miler is 15:14. So I'm betting that of somebody wearing a full costume, Jordan would probably have the best. I don't know if he's had like a sub 18 time or something like that here. I mean, he's very fast. So if anybody were to have done it, and Jordan wears like a full body costume, like
yeah, it's not just a hat.
No. Like he wore a dragon costume one year, like a lizard costume another year, and these are like full body, like Green Man from Always Sunny kind of things, where he's like from head to toe, like enveloped in his costume. So,
I love it.
Like that's what I would guess. I mean, I don't know for sure, but if I had to guess of anybody in terms of having the course record in a costume, maybe this is something I can research a little bit. Actually, I'll probably contact Jordan about that this weekend and ask him. But also, we'd have to go back and kind of, check to see. I mean, who knows? Maybe there was a previous winner who did wear a costume. We never know.
Right.
Chris, question for you in particular. Do you have a costume for this year?
I have a couple of ideas. I don't think I'm going to commit to a costume necessarily because we're going to be on the move. For those that are not familiar with how it's going to work, you and I are going to be out at the start line kind of hanging out and, filming and talking and figuring things out as we go. And we move around so quick that generally a costume would be more of a hindrance because it's like we want to see the start. and then we're going to head over to the first road crossing where we can catch runners, and then we'll kind of play it by ear from there. Now, in years past, I've done a costume, I guess you could say. We called it the Zoom meeting, which consisted of me wearing a dress shirt, tie, sport coat, and boxer shorts. And what I would do is I would actually stand out at the corner of Escondido and Pemberton and
For the
direct
first
runners.
to get people to do the little extra.
And I would just hang out there and dance. Well, it's just funny because that was, I want to say, 2018 and 2019, which was awfully prescient because now
it was before Zoom was.
So now, like if I were to show up there, people would be like, oh, he's probably that way Monday through Friday, so I don't know if I'm going to have a costume. Are you going to have a costume?
No, so for listeners and viewers, I'm getting my maiden voyage here as being part of the live stream support group, and Chris is going to be taking me around, especially for those first 4 or 5 hours, which is a key kind of first 4 or 5 hours for the live stream when we're still out on the course and getting some footage early in the morning and so forth. So I'm kind of I might be on my bike. I might be, I think we want to have as much flexibility as we can. Sure. I might, though, throw on a costume. I have a couple of ideas. I have a particular idea for a golden hour costume.
Nice.
So stay tuned on that. The next morning I may show up in something.
Yeah, I'll actually be in the studio here with Matt.
Right.
We'll be,
right. So I might
there,
have something golden. We'll see.
Wonderful.
Let's wrap up with one last question. This one's from Brett Horning. Where do you stand on going out a little harder for the first lap while it's cooler versus going out conservative and slowing down a little bit less during the afternoon?
I think that's more of a question for you because I've never run it that long.
Yeah, I do think there's an advantage to that, Brett. I think if you can get, if you're running in the win or in the golden ticket range and you can get out before you can finish your first loop before it gets too hot, you're going to have a little advantage and you can kind of chill out. It's similar at Western States where it's going to be hot, but you get up in the high country and you might want to make a little time before Robinson Flat before it really gets hot. So I would say don't go crazy, but certainly running the rollers through the middle part, and then running that downhill from Jackass back to the road crossing and running the Escondido part pretty quick if you can. That's a little bit, it's like I said, it's the only technical part, but I do think there's an advantage to that. So then if your first loop is, it's going to be in the for the front runners, 220 to 230 range. Now it's 8:30 in the morning. It's going to start warming up, but you can even sneak a little bit more fast stuff after that. But it's a good strategy for front runners as long as they're disciplined enough, not only to run just fast enough for that first loop, but to actually honestly slow down for the second loop. What often happens is I was such a great first loop, I'm feeling great, and they do it again for the second group and get their butts kicked. So you see a lot of early elite drops here in the 40-mile mark because it's like, whoa, I went out hard for the first loop and then the sun came out in the second loop and I'm done.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I have noticed is that very rarely do the elite level runners drop late in this race because once they've gotten through the heat of the day, they can push through. And that's generally what we see.
Unless there's an injury, once they get, certainly
right.
You're not going to have very many drops at mile 80.
Yeah, no. I mean, and I think that extends all the way down to the middle of the pack and the back of the pack as well. If you get to mile 80, you've got 4 loops down. You're going to do whatever it takes to stay out on the course, and I've seen runners, personally, fight through, to that 30-hour time limit and beyond. Like I've seen runners come in a couple minutes afterwards, but they're still, going at it. So I guess in closing, I wanted to see if we could, Bryce, if we got a moment, I can say, for those of you who are going to be here in town, AJW and I are going to be part of a couple of events this week. And tonight, we've got our group run actually out at Javelina headquarters, and it starts at 7 p.m. We're going to hang out. We're going to run. We've got a lot of guests. Pat Regan, Nick Curry, Pete Kostelnick, Jubilee will be there. So you can meet some of the big names in, the local running scene and also in the, as part of the Javelina 100 experience. And then we're going to go do our social at Bonehouse Brewing in Fountain Hills. Then tomorrow night, we've got a happy hour at Bachelor Pad Barbecue. And, we hope that those of you that are in town to come and be a part of Javelina 100 will join us.
What time is the Thursday one? Is that 7 also?
6 to 8.
6 to 8. Okay.
Yeah. And of course, on Wednesday or on Friday, we've got the expo. And then Saturday is when it all goes down.
And I want to say too, Aravaipa, I'm honored to be part of the live stream team this year, but Aravaipa has pioneered the live stream. We know that there's lots of races that do live streams now, but you're the pioneers. That first Black Canyon, now what, 6-7 years ago, and this Javelina live stream is just going to be so much fun. You get more equipment every year. You get more sort of dialed in with the gear. I think you're gonna see some new features this year, some new camera angles, some new locations. I'm going to learn what it means to be a field correspondent, and then spend a fair bit of time in the studio as the race kind of comes down to the wire. So, and then back out there for the morning and the golden hour. So, having watched the live stream for several years, it's really exciting for me to be on the other side of it. And thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, I'm excited to be out there with you as we're going to be basically, tag teaming the first couple hours of the race. And my goal now, I feel like the bar has been raised. I have to make sure I don't lead you astray. So, we'll basically follow the playbook I've had over the last couple years, and it seemed to work pretty well. So, when we have a good time out there, the energy is just so great. I mean, you haven't been out to Javelina in a few years. So
right, yeah.
I think it's going to be like a pretty impressive scene for you to see for the first time. And for those of you who haven't been out there before, I invite you to register for the race for next year. The race registration for next year, I can already say this, I think pretty confidently because it always happens every year, is on the 1st of January. And this year it sold out in January. Now the wait list did start up and the wait list did move, but at the same time, if you want to be a part of Javelina 100, get on it fairly early. And we hope to see you out here next year. But I can't wait for this race.
And if you're coming to the race, if you're here or you're on your way, come say hi to us at the headquarters as we're running around with our iPhones and filming and getting stuff back here to Bryce and Matt and the team, because we're it's a social event, and
absolutely.
That's by the way, the people keep coming back. Yes, it's a competitive race.
Yeah.
And yes, it's going to be a Western States qualifier for a lot of people. But it's also a social event. It's also bringing the family back together after a year of, another year of sort of pandemic and what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, it is a time to celebrate this community and what we do. So please come say hi to us. We'll have some good time. If you want to be interviewed and tell us how your runner's doing, we'd love to do that.
Absolutely. Who knows? Like, when we're filming, we never know what'll pop up on a sizzle reel or a produced piece later. Obviously there's some footage of me dancing in my underwear out on the course, and I'm never going to live it down. And it's made its way onto all sorts of social media posts. So, for AGW, for Andy Jones-Wilkins, I'm Chris Worden. Thanks to Bryce behind the board there, keeping us going, and hope you tune in this weekend for the Javelina 100 live stream, and we'll see you then.